Thank you, Mark. And as Mark said, this is a collaborative project between DAG and the University of Canberra. And my colleagues from DAG, Dr. William McClure and Dan Payne are there as well. And my colleagues, Sean Allen and Lucas Carmody. And so this is really a group work. And so this is not just my work. So. But I'm responsible for any error if you are going to find any. And so this is a presentation. This presentation is the first one of a series of presentations out of this project. And in today's presentation, I will focus on the relationship between global cities and migration. And we aim to unpack the relationship between global cities and migration so as to draw some implications for new research and policy agendas for Australian cities. This is the world we are living on that is highly urbanized. So increasingly international exchange and transactions occur between cities rather than traditional nation states. So there is a double process, which is both globalization and urbanization. So in contemporary process of globalization, we talk about different dimensions of denationalization. And in this presentation, we argue for a spatially or territorially based denationalization. As I just said, that the international transactions, exchange of ideas, products, and people movement increasingly occur between cities, blurring the traditional boundaries of nation states. Now, let's have a very quick historical look how this kind of phenomenon has been happening. So in 2007, for the first time in human history, more people live in cities. And this percentage of urbanization has been growing. And this is the map of the cities with more than 1 million population in 1950. And this is the map of big cities in 1975. And this is the map of big cities in 2000. And this is the picture of cities today, almost today. So while in Australia, and this is a map from the State of Australian Cities report. In Australia, we have 18 major cities with population of more than 100,000 populations. So how Australia is linked with the world through this, through its cities or through its major cities, that's the issue we are going to discuss today. So here I have a diagram to show the relationship between globalization and urbanization. So the two processes leading to a concurrent trends. One is the centralization, the other is the decentralization, driven by the liberalized policy and the technological advancement in transport and information. So the decentralization process refers to the decentralized production and retail. Look at this McDonald's, look at the Coca-Cola, look at your clothes and look at your shoes. Where are they made? Where are the brands from? So this is a process of decentralization across the world. At the same time, the management and the control of the decentralized production and retail is centralized. They are centralized in a few global cities. And those functions of command and control are particularly centralized in the central city areas of those global cities or CBDs. And the production in those CBDs has witnessed a process of financialization or more and more concentration of advanced producer services. Those particular attributes define global cities and their roles in the integrated world economy. So it is under this context, under this framework, we are going to discuss the relationship between global cities and migration, and in Australian context. These new challenges present a question to us. How should we read our cities in contemporary globalization? Should we continue to read our cities as space of place? How are we going to capture and define those space of flows? Those flows link these cities, linking the cities, forming a global network. So this is the way we represent our cities. We tend to use topographic representations to read our cities. And to measure the density, may it be the density of the built environment or the density of the population. So my argument is that this topographic representation of cities today is still valid, but insufficient, because they're insufficient to capture those dynamic flows linking different cities on the global arena. So these two pictures are from the state of Australian cities. They represent the density of the populations in our leading cities, Sydney and Melbourne. However, this is how things are happening now around this globe. This is how things is happening now. So this space of flows, this picture shows the internet data connection linking New York with other cities around the world. So how should we continue to use this representation to capture this new phenomenon? So that's the question we are going to address today. So this city is linked by its city, this globe is linked by its cities, forming such a kind of network, and Australian cities are linked with the world as well. And those cities form a kind of global city hierarchy. And the cities compete against each other, and this competition determines their position in those hierarchies. So one of the benchmark criteria of global city is its capacity of providing so-called advanced producer services, may it be accountancy, advertising, banking and finance, insurance, law, management, and consultancies. As I argued in the very beginning, those command and control services are centralized in a few cities. But their outreach is global. The outreach is global. And the providers of these advanced producer services, they link the cities, they link the world together. That's the argument of the global city. Let's have a look at the Australian company, advanced producer services provider, Macquarie. Macquarie, of its 12,400 staff, they are spread across 25 countries. 40% of Macquarie staff are working outside Australia. Macquarie is one of the actors that links the cities together. Macquarie is one of the actors that link Australia with the world. So next, I would like to use our foremost global city, Sydney, as an example to illustrate the argument of global city and the global city network. So let's look at the global Sydney and its global competitiveness. Of course, and it goes without saying that Sydney is a global city in different global ranking or index together with Melbourne. And Sydney's global competitiveness has been measured in different ways compared to other leading global cities. And we can also better understand our competitive advantages and disadvantages. So, and we can also measure the concentration of the advanced producer services like the finance and insurance and business services, and the concentration in Sydney, and in particular in their concentration in the Sydney's CBD. All of the arguments and evidence support the conclusion that Sydney is our global city. But what we are going to do next is we try to build the link between the Sydney's status as a global city and migration. So we take a global local perspective because Sydney is a region. more than 1,200 square kilometers, and the population is more than 1.3 million. So we need to find that particular attributes that is locally based, but put together, they constitute Sydney's status as a global city. So let's have a quick look at the historical evolution of the urban form expansion of Sydney and the Sydney's population in 1917, 1945, 1975, 2005. Sydney is growing from a monocentric to multicentric urban form. So every particular local council has its own attributes, has its own features. So we need to find out those attributes that differentiate those communities from others. So this is Sydney's the current urban form, and this map is from the Sydney Metropolitan Strategy in 2005. Let's have a quick look at the migration in Sydney region. And if we look at both living population and working population, and in both metropolitan Sydney and the central Sydney, city of Sydney, we would find that the foreign-born population percentage is growing. And this is our classic way of defining our migration, the foreign-born population and the percentage of foreign-born population. Does that definition tell a complete picture? So we look at we made a literature review to look at the global Sydney and the migration, and we find that the most literature has undertaken a traditional approach to address this topic. That is, the focus is on the demographic composition, the social features, and the spatial patterns of the migration. This is our empirical component of this project. Using the newest census data, we built a global migration index in the whole Sydney region. We measured the global migration index for all the 43 local council areas in the Sydney region, and we map out the composition of the migration that is based on the foreign-born population and the foreign-born population from non-English speaking countries, and the other indicator is whether one ethnic group is more than 25% of the foreign-born population. We build such a map, and obviously you can identify a spatial pattern of the global migration in the Sydney region, forming an arc. And at the same time, we also try to capture the global competitiveness of the Sydney region. We also build a global competitiveness index of the local councils in the Sydney region using indicators in the knowledge-intensive industries. And we also use indicators in the highly skilled occupations. We also use indicator of the education and the median income of the working population. We build the index and map out the index in the Sydney region. And especially we find another pattern of the highly global, globally competitive local councils. So if we compare this, you will identify two opposite arcs. We move further to explain the relationship between global Sydney and the global competitiveness. We measure the concentration of foreign-born population and residents working in knowledge-intensive industries, and we find very low or almost zero correlation between them at all. Let's look at the two arcs again. They are opposite to each other, and we try to measure the concentration of foreign-born population and residents working in knowledge-intensive industries in Sydney, and the correlation is particularly low. We plot the data of the 43 local councils. We also try to measure the concentration of foreign-born population and the residents working in highly skilled occupations across the Sydney region. Similarly, the correlation is very low or almost no correlation at all. So how can we justify the relationship between global Sydney and migration? We used a different definition of migration. We did not use the data of migration that is based on a country of birth. We used the migration that is based on people moved to the Sydney region in the past 1 year, regardless of their country of birth. We find some interesting statistical correlation, and the first correlation is the concentration of international migration and the residents working in knowledge-intensive industry in Sydney. So this concentration of international migration occurred between 2010 and 2011. While this concentration of residents working in knowledge-intensive industries used the data in 2011, and we can find a discernible correlation between these two. Okay, and then we continue to measure the concentration of internal migration and residents working in knowledge-intensive industries in Sydney. Again, we find a very strong correlation between these two. So there the newest data, and they look at the movement of people in the year 2010 and 2011. Then we look at the correlation between the concentration of migration and the concentration of highly skilled occupations. And again, we find a discernible correlation between these two. Then we look at the concentration of internal migration. This is international migration. This is internal migration. Between we look at the concentration of internal migration and residents working in highly skilled occupations in Sydney. We also find a strong correlation between these two variables. Then we map out the concentration of both international migration and internal migration, and we use the size of the bubbles to represent the proportions of people working in knowledge-intensive industry in Sydney. We find some correlation between both internal migration and international migration, and in a way they are related to the sizes of the knowledge-intensive workers. So we find some interesting findings, and if now I use this table to show the people movement. I just show the people movement in metropolitan Sydney, the Sydney region, as well as the city of Sydney, and we look at their people movement in 2010 and 2011. We look at 3 categories of people movement. One is the people movement intra-Sydney migration. That means in the past 1 year, they moved from another location in Sydney to its current location in Sydney. Then we also look at the internal migration. The internal migration here refers to the migration within Australia. They moved from interstate in Australia to Sydney region. And we also look at the international migration. Now, we further look at the citizenships of those migrants, because internal migrants are not necessarily Australian citizens only. So if we look at the intra-Sydney migration, we would find that in metropolitan region, 88% of them are Australian citizens, while non-Australian citizens account for 11%. Okay, and while in the city of Sydney, 74% of them are Australian citizens, while non-Australian citizens account for 24%. So if we continue to examine the internal migration and international migration, we would find that the traditional definition of migration based on the citizenship, based on the country of birth, the validity is not so strong in this situation. Okay, so we call this the new migration. And then we look at the current planning and governing of global Sydney. And again, we made a literature review, and we find that most of the literature has focused on the liberalist planning transformation for enhancing Sydney's global competitiveness, and including the use of new urbanist design to enhance our global image, to make our cities more attractive to international investment. And we have formed a kind of like a competitive urban governance paradigm. And this paradigm is led by the New South Wales state. And of course, there is also argument for our governance structure that is problematic. For example, vertically is multi-scaled and horizontally is fragmented, because across the Sydney region there are 43 local councils. How can they coordinate their planning, transport, provision, etc.? So this is the current governance structure in the Sydney region, and the vertical multi-scalar structure, the federal, state, and at the local level, and the local councils, and the horizontal fragmentation structure. So far the discussion has been focused on this kind of issues. Then I made a preliminary content analysis of the few planning documents at the federal, state, and local level. Let's have a look at our cities and our futures. And I don't want to go through them one by one. I just highlight the vision of this document, and for a productive, sustainable, and livable futures. And the key issues include our productivity, infrastructure, housing, sustainability, etc. And this is the national urban policy initiative. And this is the metropolitan strategy made by the New South Wales state government to look at Sydney in 2036. And the vision is to build a metropolitan Sydney to be sustainable, affordable, livable, equitable, and networked. And it also includes a list of key issues in building city centers, growing our economy, and providing affordable housing for the population. And we also made a preliminary content analysis of the global Sydney vision at the local council level, the Sustainable Sydney 2030, the vision. And the vision is for Sydney to become a green, global, and connected city. And the key issues include competitiveness, innovation, and environmental sustainability, etc. Then we made a content analysis using software to capture the keywords. What are the keywords included in the three documents at the federal, state, and local level? If we look at the keyword of global, in the federal urban policy document, the frequency is 10. At the metropolitan plan produced by the state government, the frequency of the word global is 205. And at the local level, the plan, the keyword global appears 76 times. At the same time, let's look at migration. It's 2, 5, and 1. If we continue to look at the thematic attributes of global, may it be global city, global Sydney, global competition, global economy, and global migration is 1 only. So from this preliminary content analysis, it's obvious that the global element, the global challenge, has been well understood, well covered in our policies and plans at the federal, state, and local level. However, the issue of migration, in particular the issue of new migration, is insufficiently addressed. So this lead us to the conclusion of this presentation. That is based on the argument or empirical findings I have made so far. First, we need to redefine new migration. New migration is globally mobile. Their identity should be more than country of birth, citizenship. Their identity includes their global mobility, their skills, and their innovative capacities. So this is and their innovations and their roles in an integrated world economy. So that's the proposition for the alternative research agenda to capture the new dynamics of people movement. And in terms of policy, we need to revisit Australian urban policy and immigration strategy to address the new migration. So intergovernmental policy coordination is necessary to integrate new migration into our urban policy and immigration strategy to enhance our global competitiveness and innovative capacity. And this is this is the conclusion of the presentation, and I open these propositions for us to discuss and debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.